Hi, this is Amanda Dery, AF Dery, and this is another video about one of my books, and I'll be reading a short excerpt from it. The one I'm doing this time is Breath of Life by AF Dery. It is a standalone novella. It is not long. And it is actually a prequel to a later book I wrote, Bound in Blood, which is the fourth book of the Conquest of Calamir series, which is currently out and complete and also available for purchase. But it's not necessary to read this one in order to understand Bound in Blood. And it's not necessary to read them in any particular order as far as that goes. You could read this one first, after, whatever. It's just a bit of backstory on one of the main characters in that book. So we will get right down to it. Chapter 1. Valentine was in love, and the world was paradise. The dancers spun around the ballroom limned in golden candlelight, every pair of eyes glittering in shared anticipation of the more private dance that was yet to come. She wondered with a warming face if her eyes shone like that as well, for she certainly felt as feverish as she imagined any of the dancers did as she walked the fringes of the room, watching and waiting. That was a good summary of much of Valentine's life. Watching, waiting for any fissure in the facade, for the least crack in her own composure that would let her true interior show. But it had been years, long years of study, long years of keeping to herself, and she was sure, absolutely sure, that she risked nothing now. She had been waiting such a long time for Colin since the first day of her apprenticeship to their mentor. He had already been studying there for a year, but he had shown no reluctance in welcoming her. She had only just passed 12 summers, and he had not been much older, but she still remembered how her heart had sped and her breath had caught when his hand had brushed against hers during that first lesson. They still did, at the remembrance of it. And now, at long last, she had been released from that apprenticeship. She had proved her competence and would be moving on, but not before she finally confessed to him. She was sure he must feel the same about her, had gone over and over in her mind all the little things he had said, all the looks he likely thought she hadn't noticed, as she tried to work up her courage to approach him. Valentine knew he would be here tonight, celebrating the love goddess's feast, and she meant to celebrate it with him at last. No more watching, no more waiting. Tonight was theirs. But as the evening stretched on, one song melted into another. Couples departed and new ones took their place. The air grew hotter and thicker, and Colin did not appear as he'd promised her he would. She felt flushed, pulling off a glove to fan herself with as she paced, her heart in her throat whenever someone new arrived, only to plummet when it was not him. Starting to feel a little sick, she retreated to one of the terraces off of the ballroom, hoping a moment's cool air would refresh her. She had been sick and gradually getting sicker for a long time, another reason why tonight's confession was so important. She ran an arm over her forehead, brushing back the damp golden tendrils of her hair escaping from their pins, and taking a deep breath as she began to walk down one of the cobbled paths through the lush greenery, trying to calm herself. He'll come. He promised he would, and he will. He knows I'm waiting for him. He must know what that means, she told herself bracingly. As the path curved around one of the ornamental trees, her heart leapt as she saw him. Colin! His back was mostly to her as he stood by another tree, but the intricately patterned green mage robes he wore were very familiar to her. She had always thought he looked particularly handsome in them. A smile broke across Valentine's face, and she took another step towards him, opening her mouth to call out to him when she heard for the first time a woman's moan, and saw for the first time the hand clutching his hair, the bare leg draped around his body, the green skirt flowing over it, almost obscuring it entirely from her view as it blended it against his robe. The smile, the greeting, and her heart all died in that single moment. Every drop of heat in her body evaporated, every last trace of warmth in her veins turned to ice. Her heart pounded madly, and she struggled to draw in air. When at last she managed, it was hot and dry, painfully scorching her nostrils and throat and lungs. She must have made some sound, though she could not hear it over the clamor of her racing heart. Colin paused, turning his head, and saw her. At first he seemed uncertain. Then his eyes raked down her body, taking in the cream-colored satin gown she had saved many stipends for in hopes of delighting him this night. She felt numb as she saw from the slowly spreading grin on her face that she had succeeded in her aim. "Well, look at you, my lovely Valentine," he said huskily. The owner of the leg made an impatient sound, but he did not look at her, his eyes riveted to Valentine in a way she had once dreamed of. Now it only made her stomach turn. "How long are you just going to watch? This is a night for celebrating love, is it not?" He freed an arm and held out a hand to her. "Come celebrate with us." Eyes that were as green as his robes flashed in the same mischievous way they had when they were children, and he would hide her quills or draw naughty pictures of their mentor in the margins of her notes. Valentine felt the bile rising in her throat. She was no longer only cold, but hot at the same time, so hot. A hand descended suddenly on Valentine's bare shoulder, squeezing it hard enough to make her gasp. She saw Colin's eyes widen in shock just as she turned in surprise to see a man in black mage robes staring down at her. She had never seen him before in her life. His dark hair was clipped so close that it could have been a shadow cast over his skull, and his amber eyes burned into hers like some malevolent spirits. As he seized her by the upper arm and hauled her back down the path so rapidly, her slippered feet could barely gain purchase against the cobbles. Pain shot through her arm. "What? Who are you?" she stammered wildly. He said nothing, continuing to pull her down the path and into the castle. In they went through one of the doorways opening onto the ballroom, through the room, couples scattering like petals torn apart in a summer storm, as he plunged directly through their midst without a moment's pause, Valentine trailing closely in his wake by her arm. Down the adjacent hall and up the stairs that spiraled up until Valentine was panting for breath, but still he did not slow. Spots sparked before her eyes, and he finally stepped off the landing and pulled her down the hallway, throwing open one door at the end. The shock finally wore off at the sight of the bedchamber beyond it. Valentine dug in her heels, or tried to, striking at his hand with her free one. "No, let me go! Who are you? Why are you doing this?" He jerked her inside without a word, as effortlessly as if she had made no resistance at all, and at his gesture, the door closed behind her, drifting shut as if on a breeze. The mage in black marched her over to the chaise by the wall and pushed her down onto it. She frantically tried to recollect herself enough to call on her magic, but he held up one hand. "I know what you are," he said. His voice sounded as cold as she had felt in the garden. "And I know what you were about to do in that garden, even if you don't. You never should have come here. You don't belong." Valentine froze, staring up at him uncertainly. I don't know what you're talking about." "Like hell you don't," he grunted. He went to the table next to the chaise and filled a glass chalice with amber-colored liquid from a bottle there. "You're studying alteration magic under old Alexander." She watched him warily as he took a drink. "How did you know that? What do you want from me?" "You're not an alteration mage," she went on, as though she hadn't spoken. "You had no business apprenticing yourself to one, though it's good for me that you did, I suppose. Otherwise I may not have found you in time." He took another swallow. The chalice held only a finger-span of fluid now, and he held it out to her. She eyed it like it was a viper poised to strike. He gave a slight shrug and drank the remaining liquid, setting the chalice back on the table. "I don't know what you're talking about. I've always done fine with alteration. Master Alexander tested me himself before he accepted me and said I had the talent for it, which I've more than proved over the past 10 years. You can ask him yourself." She started to stand, but something in the other mage's narrowed ambered eyes sent a chill skittering down her spine, and she halted, her eyes flickering back to his face warily. "Do you think I'm a fool like Alexander?" he demanded. "You would have struggled under his tutelage and suppressed your own abilities to pass as his pupil. Don't deny it. I saw you in that ballroom. You looked like you were about to spontaneously ignite." Valentine reddened. "I didn't see you in there." "No, you were distracted, weren't you? It looked like you were looking for someone. The pig rutting in the garden, if I'm not mistaken." This time she did stand, all caution forgotten. "Don't speak of him that way. You don't even know him. He got carried away by the feast, that's all." "Ah, forgive me, madam." The mage gave a dramatic bow. "I must have misread the situation entirely. You see, it sounded to me as though he were speaking to you like you were a whore in his own private brothel, and I assumed, in my naivete, that he must be a pig. If you're saying you are, in fact, a whore, then I must beg your pardon for the misunderstanding." "How dare you?" she sputtered. "You dragged me up here without my consent, and now you insult me." "I'm not even begun to insult you. Don't be dramatic," he cut her off. "And I dragged you up here because you were about to do something that you would have regretted, judging by your quick defense of that very friendly gentleman in the garden." "I never would have joined him," she said vehemently, her hands knotting into fists at her sides. The mage raised an eyebrow. That wasn't what I was suggesting, though it's interesting that's the conclusion you jumped to. Valentine was so angry she could barely breathe. The air was too thin and her whole body was shaking. She sprinted towards the door, but the mage moved directly in front of her, more quickly than she would have thought possible as she took the first step. He was so close now that she could feel his breath on her face and the heat of his body only a gasp away from her own. Suddenly it was hard to breathe for far different reasons. She quickly moved backward to put distance between them and felt the chaise knock against the back of her legs again. A sudden wave of panic washed over her, making her throat tighten and her pulse race. She realized she was trapped. She suspected the odds of her winning a mage's duel against this man, new initiate that she was, were dismally low. But it looked like there was no chance that he was going to let her leave. He took a step closer to her, bridging most of the space between them just that easily, and a small whimper burst from her throat as she watched him, her mind going blank as her panic grew. He frowned, stilling. He started to extend a hand as if to touch her face, but stopped suddenly at her flinch. Do you think I'm going to hurt you, silly girl? Sit down. There's no need for this foolishness. What do you want? I've done nothing wrong. Not yet you haven't, but there's no doubt in my mind that you would have. His amber eyes were grave. You, madam, are a necromancer. Valentine sank down on the chaise as her knees gave out from under her. And that is the first chapter of Breath of Life by Dery. So I know that there tends to be some, let's say, reticence from some readers when they hear the word necromancer, necromancy. They think that, oh God, this is going to be some really dark, heavily occult subject matter. Necromancy in the world where this particular book takes place, as well as the Conquest of Calamir and Broken Mirrors books, because they all take place in the same world, isn't quite the same as what you may be familiar with from horror movies and other fantasy series by other authors. So I would give it a try. I don't write too heavily on the blood, guts, and gore, and not that that's really an issue in Breath of Life. I mean, this one is probably the most, okay, it's one of the most fluffy, lighthearted, more romantic pieces that I've written. The other one that I was thinking of would be Wedding the Dreadlord. That one was also basically pure fluff, even more so than Breath of Life, but usually they aren't fluffy at all. These are very light books for me. Not my usual not my usual tone, but I think if you like romance and you like fantasy, don't let the necromancer part scare you off. It's not scary. It's not it's not a horror book. Give it a try. It would be my suggestion, of course. Hence this video, right? Ordering information is in the description, and if you have any questions, as always, hit me up in the comments, and I would be happy to answer you if I can. Just please be patient, because I do have some health problems. I can't always get online right away, but I'll get to it. I will. I really appreciate your time and your interest, and so see you next video. Thank you very much for tuning in today.